Good morning, everyone. This is Ron. It is Sunday morning, a little after 11 a.m. We'll get started with our session. Uh, any questions? Any questions or comments on anything that was said yesterday or anything that may have grabbed your attention this week? On yesterday, we primarily just did questions and just talked a little and talked about several things. And uh, as normal, I'm terrible at recapping unless I kind of jot some things down. And the couple things I just remember, I guess, at the end of the day was listening to Audrey and Pastor talk about who we are and understanding that and walking in that and understanding that what we are seeing internally is much greater than what religion has shown us externally. So that seeing yourself or understanding that your Elohim is a journey from within. Uh, that was the one thing that I remembered that I thought kind of just summed up the whole day yesterday. So is there anything anyone else want to mention or anything that I may have overlooked that you thought is important? Okay, no one? Pastor, are you on yet?
Ron, I don't exactly
Yes,
remember
sir.
all the stuff we talked about either, but um, when we were talking about the fact that that when we externalize things, we are creating things that inhibit us from growing spiritually. I know we didn't use those same words, but anyway.
Yeah.
But the thing that I thought about afterwards was, I mean, I finally understand what Jesus meant about forsaking your family. And he didn't mean forsake your family. He just meant that don't let those external things turn you away from finding yourself, finding who you really are. And sometimes that might look like forsaking your family, but it's all meant for your good, for lack of a better way to say it. But anyway, as it doesn't mean give up your family. It doesn't mean turn away from your family. It just means don't let that keep you from your spiritual journey. Anyway, do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, great observation. I like that. I can readily see that. I guess I see it too because something I'm currently going through, and it's no big deal. It's just a family situation that is very time consuming, and I feel guilty about not giving it the attention that some others want me to, and it does. It makes me feel guilty. So I fully understand. That makes all the sense in the world. Yeah. There is always something that grabs your attention. There is always something to do to make you busy, uh, pull you away, to distract you, if you will. I hate using that term because a family situation is not a distraction, so to speak, not the way we understand distractions, but in the manner in which we're trying to define what spiritual understanding is and growing in that direction. That's what I mean. those type of distractions or things that pull you in different directions. And family is a big one. That's good. Anyone else? Pastor, have you made it on yet? I was asking Pastor if he was on. He shared something with me yesterday about Black history that I thought was very interesting, and so hopefully, if he joins us later, he can go into that. So, uh,
Ron, this is Evelyn. When I first started with Foundation, it was different for me. I left by, as we call it, the home church, and I felt lonesome and isolated. I got, I had this one man call me a coward because I decided to leave that bondage, that slavery, which religion is. And by me being covered under pastor and having the family, the spiritual family that I'm with now, it pushed me to be able to do self reflections, to learn who I am. And it wasn't comfortable. I cried when I left. The transition was, I cried all the time. And my mom used to say, "Why are you crying?" But there was a yearning inside of me. I couldn't explain. My children couldn't explain because I would cry at home. Most of you guys know when I'm going through something, as far as with mankind, I cry a lot. But this journey has pushed me to be able to know who I am. And I forsake not my family, but that old mentality, that slavery mentality that religion had on me. And it wasn't comfortable. But when you start growing and knowing and realizing who you are, it's not bad at all. It's my purpose of being here to know who I am. But I just wanted to make that comment.
Well, you just summed it up, though, Evelyn, and I appreciate you sharing that. That loneliness and isolation that you feel is what I'm talking about. That feeling of guilt or feeling of loneliness or am I by myself with this? And because it is different than what the family values have always been. Consciousness, as it's not only talking about awareness, it's talking about what you value. And what you were doing is questioning those values that were had been given to you or shown to you all of your life. And you started to look at those things in another way. So it does isolate you. And I think it is appropriate that Audrey use that term when Jesus talked about isolation or forsaking of the family. It's talking about those values. It's talking about those things that religion has shown you is important, what God looks like. And when you start to question that, I'm sorry the man said that to you, but I am glad that you stayed true to your journey, to yourself, and look at your reward now. So that's a perfect example of what we were talking about. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Is there anyone else?
Ron, one more thing.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
There are times when I still feel lonesome. And I don't know if that's part of this journey or not, but, sometimes I still feel lonesome. And I don't know if it's part of the journey that we're on. But I just needed to be honest with myself and you as well and the family. And I just wanted to share that.
Well, I'm going to ask others to share their thoughts and feelings where they are too. I do think that's a part of the journey. I do too. I still feel lonely. I think those are uh, times to search, time to seek, to meditate, and sometime, Evelyn, you guys have heard me say this before. I don't think all the time those thoughts and feelings are ours. I think you're bearing a burden that someone maybe close to you or someone in the world is feeling. Uh, I mentioned, I can't remember if it was Kathy or Pastor I was talking to. I was saying, it was last week, was it? I just had an overwhelming feeling of guilt, just guilt. And it weighed me down. And I stopped and said, wait a minute, why do you feel like this? What are you feeling guilty about? What is this? And I couldn't put my finger on it. But as soon as I stopped and thought about it, I felt better. So I don't think all the time is ours. Uh, but those, I don't think, if we embrace them, I don't think it's a bad thing either. So, because it gives you time to pause and reflect and look at who you are and where you are. So, is there anyone else that'd like to speak to that? Anyone else that has those feelings of isolations that and how do you deal with it?
Well, Ron,
Ron, this is Valerie. I want to thank Evelyn for sharing that, because I was just sitting here thinking the same exact thing. You know, you feel isolated, you know, and it's like, and I mean, in all honesty, I miss the fellowship. And have I gone back? I've gone back every once in a while. And then you have, you know, family members, you know, they'll say, oh, well, you know, what what's the word? I'm trying to think of the word that they use. Oh, you just throwed us away, you know, and you know, that's not it. And I think a lot about what, Pastor always talk about, you know, being in that setting. I mean, I know when I was there, I mean, I just felt like something's dead, like you're just sitting there going through the motions and whatnot. And it's like, this ain't it. And when the pandemic hit, to me, I felt like that was like a catalyst for me. It was now the time for a blank slate. It's time to get rid of the stuff, and to allow the truth to come in, to get rid of all of that stuff. And yes, it's years of stuff, and I realize and know that it's not something that's going to happen overnight, you know, but I mean, just to get rid of all of that stuff that you thought that's who God was, or this who you're supposed to be, and this is what you're supposed to do, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, I really thank her for that. I mean, yeah, every now and again, I will find myself feeling lonely. You know, Sundays, you know, you used to getting up and getting out and going to church, and you know, and I'm like, sometimes I think, would it hurt if I go back? But then when I, you know, am sitting there and I'm like, nah, you know, it's just, you definitely think about, yeah, I do miss seeing the people. But but what's coming forth from the pulpit, nah, I'm like, nah, this is not it. So I want to thank her for sharing. That's it.
Thank you for sharing. Appreciate that.
I remember, I hope Kathy is on. I remember some years ago, excuse me, that she was preparing to speak to a group from another church, a women's group, I think it was. And she wanted to speak to the issue of loneliness as a part of her presentation. And she called and was unable to find a Hebrew word for loneliness. And I searched myself at her behest, and I could not find one either. And we concluded that loneliness is foreign to the Hebrew, which means that it is foreign to at least the African anyway, if not all of mankind, and that I can explain later. Loneliness, I think this thing that what we call loneliness is more of, as Val said, missing the fellowship. When we think about religion itself, especially Christianity, and well, all the religions, we are taught to shun people who walk away from the midst of us and engage on another journey of spirituality or religion or whatever. Therefore, that sense of isolation and that sense of being totally disconnected from those who we left in that setting is something that's given to us purposefully and excuse me, in a very, very, very subconscious manner, and sometimes not so much subconscious. Would you please mute your phones? Thank you. Forsake not the assembling of yourselves together is one of the things that that is used from the pulpit to make you feel bad, to make you feel guilty for not being in that setting. There are so many terms that's used in the church. The main one is if you walk away from God, who you going to? When Jesus said, when Peter said, if we leave you, to whom shall we go? There's nothing left. So that is used to make us feel like we can't leave. As far as isolation is, many, many, many years ago, I was wrestling with the same thing you guys are talking about. Now, I do miss the fellowship, but I don't miss the rest of it. I don't feel lonely either. I can't. When I years ago, I started thinking about that because, as I said, I was wrestling with it, and some words came to me one night while I was dealing with it, and the words were, "It is better to be isolated from men, and be isolated from men." I'm sorry. It's better to be isolated with God and insulated from men than it is to be insulated from God and isolated with men. And those words have stuck with me for many, many years. And I had to remind myself of that up until the point where I no longer felt that way. I don't feel like that anymore. I relish being isolated with God or with the Creator. I relish the insulation that I have that protects me from having to wrestle with the pseudo truth or wrestle with the lies that are in the scriptures. The lies that people say, rather, are about the scripture. I'm sorry. I did not intend to say that at all. One of the reasons that I do believe there is a major sense of loneliness is also because of the scriptures that are preached over and over and over again. If you think about what's preached from that pulpit, you never, ever get different scriptures that are talked about or preached about. None of them are taught, but they are preached about. The question is why? Well, it happens because of our previous experiences with religion. From the time of our introduction to Christianity in particular, and until we began to we received permission to preach the scriptures and read the scriptures, there were pages torn out of the Bibles that we were given. And that is the reason there are certain scriptures you never hear us talk about. When that was remedied by getting a full Bible, the only thing then we preached about was the deliverance from Egypt, but we did not understand what that meant. We also preached about the deliverance that Jesus brought to us, that Jesus saved us, Jesus delivered us. And that in itself made us feel like we were different, that we were committing blasphemy if we walked away from that setting, because only Jesus can deliver us, when the scripture clearly shows us that Jesus did not come to deliver us. Jesus came to show us how to be delivered. So this isolation, the loneliness, yes, it is something that we have to deal with. However, the question is, how do we approach it, and how do we understand it? Because certainly, knowing who we are, one yet many, it is impossible for us to be spiritually lonely. But it is definitely a thing that besets us to be religiously lonely. Thank you.
Pastor, the
Well,
scripture you quoted, do you remember where it is?
Which one?
Isolated with God.
That's not the scripture.
No.
I was given that one night. I was doing what I call prayer back then, but it was actually meditation in the middle of the night, trying to deal with that separation. And those are the words that were given to me.
So then, by using those words, then what can I conclude that you're saying? Those opportunities that we feel that way, may be Elohim trying to get our attention for meditation or for prayer, or to be isolated with Him, rather than, and that's why everything else may be removed from us, removed from thought. I just want you to elaborate on it just a little bit more, please.
Okay. Well, that was my conclusion. And
Okay.
as a result of my concluding that, each time I felt a tinge of that, I would purposely get up in the middle of the night. I would either study scripture, or I would lay on my face in complete silence. And that was when I did not understand meditation, prayer, the difference between the two. And I was actually meditating and didn't know it. Now, when I say in the middle of the night, my days were filled with work, doing things. And at night, when I got home, everyone was up. So I needed the time to focus, and I waited like 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And I would get up. I would go to bed, and I would get up, and I would go to my place, my not secret place, but my quiet place, my place of refuge. And that's where I would silently wait to hear. And this is the funny thing about it. When I was silently waiting to hear for quite some time, I'm like, I didn't hear anything. And then one day I realized that my hearing was not with my ears, it was with my soul. And what made me realize that is I would go through that period of meditation and that period of silence. And then when I spoke again, referencing scriptures or teaching or preaching, things came out of my mouth that I had never researched or had never heard before. And when I look back at them after they had come out of my mouth, they were actually a better understanding of the scriptures than I ever thought was possible for me. So it is in that regard that even to this day, I continue the process of isolation and installation. Thank you. I hope that helps, sir.
It does for me, but anyone else? Thank you. Anyone else want to speak to what Pastor just said?
Well, if I could just add my own inflection or observation in terms of my own experience, literally through my own experience, I've learned to distinguish between being alone and being lonely. And some of you know, and some of you don't, that in my life, I've moved a great deal. So there have been plenty of occasions when I had the opportunity to be both or one or the other. And I've learned to distinguish the idea of loneliness. It's an externalization, really. It's a wanting to sort of recapture, regain a connection. What you believe at first is a connection, but to some extent, it's a dependency. It's almost like wanting to return to childhood and having the parent protect you. But if you embrace that, you can find a truth that allows you to interpret that more as, in my case, aloneness. And for me, I learned and experienced aloneness as a door that if I open and walk through, takes me to a wilderness opportunity. And by that, of course, I mean an opportunity to grow. So for me, and I'm human, we're social beings. I feel lonely at times. I'm separated from Audrey at the moment, so I can feel lonely. But I ask myself, what am I doing? What am I saying? What am I being when I feel that way? And if I embrace that, I don't give into it, so to speak, in an emotional way, but I can understand what it's shallowness, if you like. So for me, when you're lonely, you're externalizing something in yourself and trying to cling or regain a connection, which in a way is a false connection, because of course the real connections are within you. But because we're social beings, it comes out of a sense of separation, and all that mix. At least that's been my experience and my journey with it. But when I've had those opportunities, or I've seen them ultimately as opportunities to be alone, as I can feel I am now, sitting here in Mexico with Audrey up in North Carolina, versus being lonely, it's an opportunity for me to grow. It's a space in which I can explore, I can understand myself better, etc. So anyway, I just suggest that from my experience.
Okay. Well, thank you, Richard.
Good morning.
Go ahead, George.
No, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I agree with what everyone is saying, and I greatly appreciate what Reverend Richard stated about the insulated and isolated. I've never heard it put like that before. Yeah, just as a suggestion, some isolation that comes my way, I created that. Meaning low level frequency and thinking, not not being able to work with people and just making something difficult. So some isolation that has come my way, I gotta live with it. I created it. And as a suggestion to others, if you created your isolation, you got to live with it also. That's just another side of being isolated. That if I created this, I have to live with it because you're going to be by yourself. It's just going to happen. So that's just another part of being isolated that I just think we need to explore. Do you agree with that, Ron, Reverend Richard, Nick, Sheldon, Miss Audrey, Miss Barbara, Miss Evelyn? Or you don't agree with it? Or you don't know how y'all feel about that?
This,
Uh,
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Nick.
Okay. This is the biggest thing that I think, especially in America, that the church provides is the sense of community and, ability to make friends which was essentially all attempts were made to destroy that. So I think that is just a component of human experience that we all need. Of course, with the church, it comes with that sort of secondary objective of basically doing everything that religion wants to do, of course. But I just wanted to say that, yeah, I also agree with everything said. One of the things that I heard somebody I used to like watching on YouTube say was that the path of wisdom is a lonely one. And I think that's something that you have to accept if your desire to pursue your own connection to the Creator is one that you cannot ignore. That said, you won't always be lonely. And there is that distinction between being alone and being or feeling lonely. But I think at some point you learn to recognize that that is what, or sort of that being alone or sometimes feeling lonely is just part of what comes with doing something that requires you to break away from everything that you were familiar with. If you've come to realize that what you were familiar with was not the truth. Thank you.
Can I just add to that? Speaking of being lonely, when I was growing up as a small child, around 7 or 8 years old, I used to have this sense of being so lonely. And I had no idea what it was about because I had tons of sisters and brothers. So I was not alone, so to speak, but I had this sense of being lonely. And what I'm discovering as we're talking is that you can look at that in two ways. Because we're human and we associate with other humans, we can define it as lonely. But my supposition is that the other side of that is that it is a yearning. And even as a 7, 8-year-old little girl, I used to pray so hard. And I had instead of being lonely, I had such a yearning to know the Creator. So I think in some cases, you can describe loneliness as more of a yearning, that a yearning to feel connected, maybe. But but a yearning to be beyond yourself, so to speak. Because I feel like what, as Pastor said, how can you be lonely when you are Elohim? And Elohim is plural, and we all are Elohim. So for me, I feel like that loneliness is more of a yearning to make a connection or to feel the connection. And on this journey, I've learned that you don't have to exactly feel the connection, because you just know you're connected. And the other point I want to make is when Pastor was saying, forsake not the assembling of yourselves together. I remember we talked about that a while ago. It's a double entendre. It has two meanings. Assembling together as a congregation, but also the assembling of yourself together in terms of you getting to know who you are, you using meditation, you using prayer, you using that isolation, you using whatever it takes for you to know yourself, to assemble yourself together. And yes, all of that it can feel like you're lonely, it can feel like you're out there on a limb all by yourself. But if we think of it as more a yearning to know ourselves and to know the Creator, then I think it makes it gives it a little different meaning, if you see what I'm trying to say. Anyway, thank you.
Just quickly, if I could build on what Audrey just
Thank
said.
you.
To me,
I think
Audrey's expressing how you move, how you begin to move from that sense of loneliness, which is kind of a gap, something's missing, a dependency, to a phase of looking for something that's more truthful and fulfilling. And that will take you maybe to, in my case, an understanding that you can be alone without being lonely. And then the question is, how do you use that experience? And that to me has been the wilderness opportunity. So you transition from that more so into yourself, and then you use the opportunity to expand, to grow in your own being. And just a comment before, we talk here on the phone a lot about we're all Elohim, but let's be honest, really, 100% everybody's committed to that and understands, has internalized that in themselves? I don't think so, but that's not a judgment. It's just an expression of where each of us might be in that process. So if there's still that gap, then there are going to be moments of weakness, if you want to call it that, or dependency, or they used to say in social psychology, you give in to being a bit more other directed than inner directed, meaning I need somebody else to help me get through the moment. That's one thing I've never liked about AA. And the church is a huge AA organization to me. You're always going to be a sinner. You're always going to be an addict. I don't buy that. But that maintains the dependency, which to me has always been revealed as one of the objectives. So it's a journey. And the hard part is to embrace where you are. So if you're feeling lonely, do what you can to embrace that and realize that there's no punishment going on here. There's some confusion, but turn that into an opportunity, or find in yourself a yearning to have that become something constructive. And that moves you away from being lonely into, like I said, a sense of, okay, in this moment in my life, I'm alone. I'm separated in a sense from this community I knew from before. But instead of putting value judgments on that, embracing that and saying, how can I grow from this? And then using that experience in that way.
Yes, I
Good
agree
morning.
that we have to embrace that feeling. And that's how we deal with it. Go ahead, Kathy.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Audrey. I just wanted to add to this conversation because I remember when Pastor, what he referenced about when we were looking at that word lonely, he said something to me that I've never forgotten. And he said, you can be lonely in a house full of people. You can be lonely in a crowd and that can be your family or anyone. And when he said that, I held on to that because it made me wonder, we already determined that there was no real word for loneliness when we started to look for that. But in remembering that, then I started to ask myself, well, what about this feeling of isolation? What is the purpose of that when we're going through that? And I started to tie that to the scripture that says, be still and know. I think in those times when I am feeling isolated or when I'm feeling like I'm not fitting in with the rest of the family or I'm just not fitting where I thought I used to fit, that is me being still and knowing that I am. And when I can remember and hold on to that, it helps me to understand these are growing pains. Then yeah, this is a situation that I have created based on my desire to be truth, based on my desire to walk in truth. And as a result of that, when I hold on to that, I recognize that who I am, and these are growing pains, and to hold on to that. But I also look at a lot of things happen in our midst and we miss it. And what I mean by that, to me, the epitome of the journey of what we're talking about right now, I saw that play out in the life of my cousin Mott. When Mott was living and when she was on this journey and she started to embrace truth, and you have to know my family history. We come from a long line of religious believers and strong-willed people and men who have just used scripture to kind of beat you over the head all the time. And what does the scripture say? And what does the Bible say? Are you doing this? And when she started on this journey of truth, coming from 11 siblings, mother, father, they all walked away from her. And that was hard. And I know it had to be hard because she was isolated. And I'm talking now in the physical sense. And so when that began to happen to her, I watched her journey. She stayed true to the course. She embraced those and the teaching that she was receiving. She didn't forsake the assembling of herself together with like-minded people, in that she didn't walk away from what she was being taught, because we often say, what do I have to go back to? And that bridge has been burned because we're burning the bridge. What am I going back to? There's nothing to go back to. So I watched. She didn't stop loving her family. She just didn't deal with them. She just was not going to let that bring her to a place of going back to where she was, because she knew that was not the true journey. And before she transitioned, what I saw happen with her family, they all recognized who it was, and they wanted to be like her. She was able to reconcile with them, but she didn't have to compromise one belief or one thing that she had ever been taught. And even to this day, since she has been gone many years now, the family still emulates and tries to be what they thought she was or who they thought she was, in the sense of they still want to be like her. They began to understand she was different. So isolation is about being different to me, and I embrace being different. I was just telling Linda yesterday, I think we're all a little different and a little weird, and there's nothing wrong with that, because if I'm not set apart and different, then that means I'm just status quo like everybody else. And I want to embrace that difference. And in those times of being lonely, even if I'm surrounded by family and I'm not fitting in with the way they're speaking and the way they think, then that creates a little bit of feeling of loneliness. But at what cost am I willing to not be lonely? I'm not willing to give up the journey, to go back to whatever it was, the religious thoughts and the religious way of living. I'm not willing to pay that price of giving that up just so that I won't be quote unquote lonely and I'll feel included. And so the thing that we're talking about today is an opportunity to be still and to know that you are, I am, as a result of just, and you hear me say this all the time, sitting with yourself. So I've looked at those people around me who walked this journey, even like I said, mine is transition now, but she taught me how to stand firm in your convictions and your belief and never waver or never doubt who you are. And even when in those moments when you feel like no one is with me or I feel like I'm by myself, if I can't shake it through meditation and just being in the moment and breathing and knowing and embracing who I am, then I'm going to pick up the phone and call one of you. Because at that moment, I may need some help to remind me of who I am. And so I just wanted to share that with you because I see it as an opportunity and not a bad thing, because I never forgot. Loneliness isn't about you being singly isolated somewhere else. You can be lonely in the midst of everyone. And so just remember the power in sitting with yourself and recognizing that in those moments, it's an opportunity to grow because you are the I am. And I just wanted to share that. So thank you.
If I can add one last thing here, maybe.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, everyone that has spoken.
Then I'll try to be quiet. But tying it a bit back to Evelyn, what I would say to Evelyn is go ahead and cry your eyes out. Let the emotion come out of you. Don't pretend you shouldn't have it. And you can't, in the middle of an emotion, always say, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Let it out. I have cried. I have thought about circumstances in my life. I've thought about experiences I've witnessed of other people's difficulties in their life. And it's touched me very emotionally. And I realized that's not a bad thing at all. Let it happen, let it come out. But then you need to sort of find a way to embrace it and say, okay, what is that telling me? How do I not exploit this, but how do I use this to grow in an understanding? Because all these things are there they can help if you let them. You don't have to deny it. That's where things get piled up and you start creating a closet full of baggage. Okay, and it takes years to figure that out for some of us, certainly for me. So that's all I would say. So it's perfectly okay. The question is then, what do you do with it? I guess you could say to benefit your understanding and your growth. And good Lord, that's what psychiatry is all about. Should be. So, okay.
Okay. I agree with everything that's been said. Most of what's been said. Anyway, there's a couple of things I want to mention. But something Kathy said and Audrey kind of alluded to as well. We all have our paths, and our paths are similar. And I agree with the fact that I think we're all a little different. We all have our own little quirks, even the ones on this line that don't speak. And those feelings that we're describing, as Richard said, some of them seem like loneliness to us and some of them are not. But I agree that they're all opportunities. And I think we all come to that conclusion. One thing that I want to make sure we're on the same page about, there is no degrees to being Elohim. You either recognize it or you're not. You are, whether you recognize it or not. But once you recognize it, that's a whole other place. That's a whole nother place of consciousness. And that doesn't go away once you embrace that. That doesn't go away. There was a time in my life, and this may be a poor example. There was a time in my life when I was terrible at math. And I concluded that that fear came from Miss Lott. I was terrified of Miss Lott. But she turned out to be a really nice, gentle person. She wasn't once you talk to a one-on-one. In the classroom, she was not. But she terrified me and asked the question. But once I got algebra down, once I understood algebra and did not fear it anymore, the rest of it came easy. Now, right now, I'm not prepared to teach a math class of any kind. But once I embraced that, I recognized in my mind anyway, there was no concept that you could put past me. It made geometry easier. But I didn't like it enough to pursue that. But I no longer feared it because now I know math. Whether or not I can do 2 + 2 anymore, whether or not I can show you what's geometry? Those angles.
Geometric.
All those geometric. The point is, if I go inside myself, if I search, what is hidden will be revealed because I now embrace math. That's my example of being Elohim. I embrace that. That is not going to leave me. There's no degree of being that. There are things that are hidden from me until I am mature enough or until I need them. That enlightenment comes to me. But I am always Elohim. That is not a separation. And the loneliness does not exclude that feeling of loneliness. That does not take that away. And if it makes you feel like I told you, it took me a while to embrace that, but that was not due to that was due to my religious background, saying that you are not this and you are not that, and you can know. How dare you think that you are this? Why would you be God of all people? That came from my religion. But I just want us to understand that being Elohim, that transformation is a revealing more than anything. That is not showing God who you are, but showing you who you are. And once we embrace that, then the layers start coming off. But that does not go away. Okay? Any questions about that? Any?
Ron,
Yeah,
this is Evelyn. This
Yes,
is
ma'am.
Evelyn again. I like and I love and I appreciate everything that has been said today because to me, it's growth for all of us. And what Kathy and Pastor, what everybody has said. I like what Audrey had said as well about the yearning. But every
love
time
that, yeah.
now, yes, I'm telling you, I love that word. Thank you, Audrey. And thank you too, Kathy and Pastor and everybody else who commented. But yeah, I think that's more of what I'm feeling now, the yearning of knowing who I am. Yes, you can be around a lot of people, but nobody can fill that void but you. I don't care what we do, who we talk to, but that's a space where only me and God can fill. And I just appreciate that because I'm not the only one, like you guys said. I'm not the only one feeling this way. But everybody don't have what we have on this line with Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. Everybody don't have this. And they don't have to have it because we're getting it. And like you guys said, we put it out there in the macro. But I'm just grateful to hear what has been said today. To me, that's soul food. Now I appreciate being by myself. I sit in the park a lot and I talk to the trees. I embrace the wind that hits my face. And it just helps me feel exuberated. All the verbs. I just feel real good. And I'm just grateful for the family that I have. And somebody's going to learn from this. We all going to learn from this. But thank you guys for everything. I'm done.
If I could say something before someone else get in right quick, I appreciate the beginning of this conversation as well, what you said, Evelyn, and what Val said. Recognize that this is our community. Recognize that we are seeing each other right now as well. Maybe not physically, but we're feeling, we're experiencing, we're expressing ourselves. And this conversation, especially because we came together on something that seemed like it may have been something, I won't say missing, but something we're all experiencing that we had not talked about. And because we've talked about it, because we've embraced it, we became closer as a community. So I love that. I love what I think a lot of things have been answered and said today that has warmed me and made me feel good about what we do. And that, as you just said, this also goes out in the macro. Okay. Anyone else? I just got a text from Craig. Craig, you care to share your comment, please, sir?
Well, just listening to what everybody was saying make me think is that, now I just want to make sure I understand this, is that being alone is a state of being. It's there's no one else, they're physically present with you. But loneliness is a state of mind or emotion. With loneliness, we miss the presence of others or ourselves. There's a feeling of emptiness that needs to be filled with either insight, wisdom, or understanding. And then that is basically that we're never truly alone. If we are one, that means we are always together spiritually. And sometimes that emptiness, that yearning comes from, we know that there's something else. And at that moment is when we need to meditate and stop and figure out what, or listen to what that something else is, and listen to what's missing in that void that we're feeling at that time, because everything that's intended for us has already been placed in the macro for us. And it's just that either we are too distracted to see it or to feel it. And sometimes those feelings of loneliness, because we've said it on this call, is that we can be in a room with 1,000 people and still feel lonely. And at that moment is something, maybe it's something in us that we need to get rid of, because and fill it with insights and fill it with the I am. It just, and that's what I feel with, that's what I'm seeing in this thing with loneliness, is that it's a state of mind. Is we, and I think that yearning that we have is, and we hit on it, is that something's missing. And it's not always something or someone physical. A lot of times it's part of us that's missing. We don't understand, we are missing an understanding of who we are or what we're intended to be. And I think sometimes when we go through that time and we spend our time alone to reflect, we gain an understanding of what's missing, and that part of us that's missing. And sometimes it's that feeling of loneliness is not ours, it's somebody else's. We may never know who it is, but if we stop and focus on that loneliness and how to fill that void, we may be filling the void for somebody else. Because again, if we are truly one, if I take care of me, I'll take care of you. And that's it.
I agree with that. What was brought to mind while you were talking, Craig, is something that I experienced yesterday in talking with this guy at the First African Baptist Church in Savannah. We were talking about how the church played a role from like 1777 until today in the lives of African people. And during the course of the tour of the church, there was a quilt. And the quilt, the pieces in the quilt actually was a message that will guide the enslaved to a place of freedom. And it was wrought with instructions of how to escape and what was needed with them along the journey and where they should end up. And all of this was encoded in pieces in the quilt. And as long as they had those pieces, whether the quilt that we saw was actually made from the small pieces of cloth that they had as their maps. So what I saw there was something that took me back to Harriet Tubman and others, especially her, when she was leading others to freedom, or when she left on her own to go back to get other people. She was never lonely. And even though she attributed it to God speaking to her, what we've begun to understand is that she was in constant contact with the ancestors. And being in constant contact with the ancestors is no different than realizing that we are Elohim, one yet many. And that's something we've talked about in the past. So when I take that and couple it with the quilt, I see a picture developing. Excuse me. When we look at a quilt, we don't talk about the pieces in the quilt as he talked about yesterday. We don't talk about the pieces in the quilt. We talk about the quilt as a whole. And when we embrace humanity as a whole, then we are not a piece of the quilt. We are the whole quilt. And that in itself gives us a sense of belonging, because the whole concept of loneliness means or speaks to the idea of feeling that you are devoid of friendship, you are devoid of the intimate relationships that you have with others. Those have been taken away from you, or you have left them behind. And when you think about the attachments in regards to a quilt, if you've ever been sewn together, you're still there. What changes is your process of thinking. Kathy made mention of in the beginning of her statement that you can be in the midst of 1,000 people and still be lonely. It's not because of being separated from the people physically, is being separated from the people in your thoughts. What am I saying? In the midst of the family structure, when you are socializing, you can talk and you can laugh with each other and you feel you're there. However, when it gets to the more weightier things in life, whether it be a discussion of materialism, a discussion of history, a discussion of religion, it doesn't matter. When you get into those weightier things of life, that is where you begin to have this sense of loneliness based upon the reality that you are not a part of that fabric, that you're not a part of that tapestry, that quilt that is sewn to depict a pseudo history or a pseudo religion. And you begin to realize that you have been sewn into a tapestry of truth, or at the very least, you are being sewn into a tapestry of truth, and having that experience. You see that when you look back, the reason there's nothing to go back to is because that thing that you thought was a quilt or a tapestry of Christianity or religion, that church setting does not exist because there are no threads to hold it together. And that is the reason that when the wind blows, the pieces blow apart or they separate from each other, some never to be found again. So we are in a setting, a spiritual setting now that is real. And the reality of that spiritual setting is is there for us. So if we are unable to bring ourselves to this reality of unicity, there are others on the phone that we can call and help us to help to remind us, as was stated earlier, of who we are, so that we can be reminded that we are indeed the quilt, and the quilt cannot exist without the pieces, as opposed to being pieces of cloth that are laid out and the wind blows them apart. And that's what Christianity is, because Christianity is the truth of Christianity is the truth that you want it to be, as opposed to the truth of what the scripture says. Thank you. I hope I'm not confusing.
Thank you, Pastor. No, it wasn't confusing. And I'm not sure today will be the day that I wanted you to go back into that about the church, the tour. That's the word I'm looking for. The tour that you had yesterday. I thought that was interesting, and may save it for another time. But the more details that you have in that, I want to visit something else Craig said earlier, and I think this has been said, just all of us said in our various ways. The scripture says, and it's talking to those who are on the journey, right? The scriptures are not written for everybody. It's just a book you pick up off out of Barnes and Noble. This is a specific type of search that you have to be on and want to embrace, and that includes people in religion. People, a lot of, because you know as well as I do, our family members are searching for something. They may not agree with everything we say, but there are people who are sincere about their search. There's psalm that says, "The Lord is my shepherd; I have no needs, nothing that I want, and no desires, not desires, but no wants. There is nothing that we are in need of once we recognize who we are. The things that we have, we embrace, and those take us from levels of consciousness to other levels of consciousness. But Craig mentioned the things that are missing. So are we to conclude from that? Does everyone feel like that state of mind that they're in, that we have, some of us have called loneliness, and some of us recognize as a quest of some sort, that you are looking for something, that is something that may be a place of another place of awareness that you're searching for? Is that something that we can have concluded from this, you think? Do you understand my question?
I think, yeah, I do. I was just waiting for someone else. I think that that we have been taught that the relationships that we have, whether it be if it's church or whatever, fills every void in our lives. And we definitely have been taught that church fills every void in our lives, when that is not true, never has been true. And which means that we're always looking for something. Because if the truth be told, even when we were in the midst, there was still something missing. And if there were not something missing, then we would not be where we are now. Because that thing that was missing while we were there, we started searching for it, and it found us. And that's the reason we are where we are. Now, as far as being in this place of aloneness. I remember when I grew up with a zillion kids in the neighborhood, and I grew up with 99% of those zillion kids in my neighborhood were my relatives. And the ones with whom I grew up within the household and next door, I've always felt like the outlier because of the way that I was treated by those with whom I grew up. And I felt like I was in the world all by myself until I began to realize that my desires were different. And of course, I didn't realize it at that age, but I realized that my desire is to know. My journey was different. For example, I've been reading all my life, so I read out everything. No one taught me to read, and other kids would be playing, and I would be reading. Or if I made an effort to do something, I made sure that I won in doing in terms of shooting marbles, jumping rope, whatever it was. I did it, and that in itself was a type of separation. Now that I think about that, but I think about the child who is 3, 4, 5 years old, who grows up in a house all alone, no siblings, or have 5 siblings and still grow up the same way, because that 3, 4, 5-year-old kid is sitting there in that yard or on that porch or in that room talking to someone. And that kid does not realize or even think about being lonely or alone until he gets older and begins to hear what aloneness or loneliness is supposed to feel like. But as long as they're in that room with those imaginary friends or in that yard with those imaginary friends, there is no sense of aloneness at all. The question, I think, becomes why? Why is that so? Is it because of this child, these imaginary friends, are really a state of training? The child is still connected to the world that it came from when it entered the womb. Is the conversations with these imaginary friends, are they really imaginary, or are they the energies of the ancestry that the kid is experiencing? And if we don't take that away from them, they will grow up and continuously embrace the presence of those who are not seen, but are more real than we are who are seen. Just a thought. Thank you.
Okay. I like that thought. Something to think about. Maybe we'll visit that again. Jot that down. Where are we, guys? Any other questions or comments? Okay. Well, it's been a little over an hour. Might be a good place to pause, and I think a lot has been said. I know I've learned something from this. I embrace it now, rather than look at it as something negative. So I appreciate that. I appreciate everything that was said. But Hope you guys have a great day. If you have no other questions or comments, seems like we can pause not here and resume tomorrow afternoon, if that's okay with everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay. Well,
Thanks,
have a good day.
everybody.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone.